31,000 feet above France, June 1943. Robert Johnson's instrument panel exploded into his face. Glass, blood. The canopy frame shattered. 21 20mm cannon shells punched through the P-47's fuselage in seconds. Hydraulics sprayed red across the windscreen. He couldn't see. The Focke-Wulf circled back for another pass. Johnson braced his boots against the panel, pulled with everything he had. The jammed canopy moved 3 inches. His shoulders fit through. His parachute didn't. The Thunderbolt spun toward the French countryside at terminal velocity. Below 10,000 feet now. The German pilot pulled alongside, shook his head in disbelief, fired again. The P-47 kept flying. This wasn't luck. It was physics most Luftwaffe pilots couldn't comprehend. A turbo supercharger trick that fundamentally rewrote the rules of air combat. While Messerschmitts gasped for oxygen above 27,000 feet and Focke-Wulfs wheezed past 25,000, American pilots hunted an air so thin it should have killed their engines. The Secret sat 19 feet behind Johnson's seat, screaming at 21,300 revolutions per minute, exhaust pipes glowing cherry red. A General Electric turbine the size of a washing machine, fed by ducts a man could crawl through, transforming waste heat into crushing altitude dominance. German engineers knew the concept. They tried it on experimental FW190s. They couldn't make it work. Republic Aviation's Alexander Kartveli had. The Georgian immigrant designed the entire aircraft around the turbocharger, not the other way around. 43 feet of intake ducting, intercoolers, wastegates, a belly so deep the wings had to mount high, landing gear that telescoped 9 inches just to clear the massive propeller. The result, a 7-ton monster that fought where others died. Johnson nursed the crippled Thunderbolt across the channel, somehow landed at base. Mechanics counted 21 cannon holes. The turbocharger was still spinning. Stay with this story, because this engineering marvel changed the war before most pilots understood what hit them.
January 1943. RAF King's Cliff, England. The 56th Fighter Group stared at their new fighters with something between horror and disbelief. Fresh from Spitfire Vs, elegant, nimble dancers weighing 5,000 pounds, they now faced Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, 9,900 pounds empty. Fully loaded, 16,000. "We can defend ourselves from Germans," one British pilot joked, "by running around inside the fuselage and hiding." The strategic problem was existential. 8th Air Force B-17s were dying over Germany at rates that made daylight bombing unsustainable. Luftwaffe fighters simply waded beyond the Spitfire's 175-mile combat radius, then massacred the bombers. August 1943's Schweinfurt-Regensburg raid, 60 bombers lost, 600 men. Deep penetration required range. Range required fuel. Fuel required weight. Weight required power. And power at 30,000 feet required solving a physics problem that had killed dozens of engine programs. At sea level, air molecules pack tight, 14.7 pounds per square inch. At 5 miles up, pressure drops to 4.4 psi. Combustion requires oxygen. Less oxygen means less power. A naturally aspirated engine loses roughly 3% power per 1,000 feet of altitude. By 30,000 feet, most engines produced half their rated horsepower. Mechanical superchargers helped, gear-driven compressors that rammed denser air into cylinders. But they sapped engine power to operate and had fixed gear ratios. Above their optimum altitude, performance collapsed. The turbo supercharger answered differently. Use exhaust gases, normally wasted, to spin a turbine connected to a compressor. No mechanical drive, no parasitic power loss. Adjustable boost across all altitudes. General Electric had been refining the concept since 1918. Sanford Moss's team tested prototypes at 14,109 feet atop Pikes Peak. By 1942, the C-23 turbo supercharger was ready. Republic's challenge: build a single-seat fighter around it. Alexander Kartveli's solution would give American pilots an untouchable advantage, but only if they survived learning how to use it. The Germans were about to get a very unpleasant surprise.
Republic Aviation's Long Island facility, 1940. Alexander Kartveli crushed his third cigarette into an ashtray already overflowing with contradictions. The Army wanted 40,000 feet ceiling, 400 miles per hour, 8 machine guns. The numbers didn't reconcile with anything resembling a fighter. The turbo supercharger sat on his drafting table like an accusation. General Electric's C-23 unit, 235 pounds of precision-machined buckets and impellers. But the system needed ducting, intercoolers to cool the compressed air, wastegates to regulate boost, oil systems. The complete installation, 977 pounds of accessories. Cardvelli sketched furiously on the train back from the Army meeting. He drew a semi-elliptical wing, 300 square feet. On the back of an envelope, he calculated combat weight, 12,000 pounds. Then came the brutal geometry. Exhaust gases had to travel 19 feet from the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine to the turbine, positioned in the fuselage belly halfway between cockpit and tail. Intake air, 43 feet from nose scoop to turbocharger to intercooler to carburetor. The ducts were massive, large enough for a mechanic to crawl through. This drove the fuselage depth. Deep fuselage forced high wing mounting. High wings demanded long landing gear. The enormous 146-inch propeller needed ground clearance. Cardvelli's solution, landing gear struts that telescoped 9 inches during extension. In the Republic workshop, metal shapers screamed. Engineers tested duct junctions under pressure. At full power, exhaust pipes would reach 1800 degrees Fahrenheit at their forward ends, hot enough to glow visible red through the fuselage. They wrapped them in stainless steel, designed boundary layers of cool air for protection. The turbine would spin at 21,300 RPM. One seized bearing would be catastrophic. Test pilot Lowry Brabham took the XP-47B up for the first time on May 6, 1941, climbed to 25,000 feet. The turbocharger engaged. The engine didn't fade. It roared. Cardvelli permitted himself a rare smile. The Germans weren't going to understand what happened to them.
April 15, 1943, over Ostend, Belgium. Major Don Blakesley spotted the Focke-Wulf 190 at his 4 o'clock, 2,000 feet below. The German was climbing hard, unaware. Blakesley's P-47 sat at 28,000 feet. He rolled inverted. Dove. The Thunderbolt accelerated like physics suddenly remembered gravity existed. 7 tons converting altitude to kinetic energy. The airspeed indicator needle swept past 400, 450, 500 miles per hour. The FW-190 never saw it coming. 8 Browning M2s converged. 2-second burst. The German fighter came apart mid-air, tumbling into a suburb of Ostend trailing flames. First confirmed P-47 kill. At the debriefing, Blakesley was less than enthusiastic. "It ought to be able to dive," he muttered. "It sure as hell can't climb." He wasn't wrong. The P-47 took 20 minutes to reach 30,000 feet from ground level. A Bf-109G made it in 11, FW-190A 14 minutes. But the Luftwaffe was learning something terrifying. Once the Americans established altitude, once they positioned themselves at 30,000 to 32,000 feet, the performance gap inverted catastrophically. The turbo supercharger maintained full manifold pressure where German fighters gasped. Above 27,000 feet, the P-47's maximum speed of 433 miles per hour exceeded everything in the Luftwaffe inventory. The Bf-109G's performance dropped sharply past 25,000 feet. The FW-190A, deadly below 20,000 feet, became sluggish and heavy-handed in the thin air. German pilots reported the phenomenon with frustrated disbelief. The Americans would climb out of reach, then swoop down in boom and zoom attacks. When Germans tried to follow them back up, the Thunderbolt simply outran them vertically. Dive away, the P-47 was heavier. It accelerated faster, reaching terminal velocities the German fighters couldn't match. Turn fight? Only below 15,000 feet, where the P-47 was vulnerable. But escorts didn't start at low altitude. They started high, and at altitude, the Luftwaffe couldn't touch them. The kills started accumulating. The turbo supercharger's advantage wasn't subtle. It was absolute.
8th Air Force Headquarters, High Wycombe, August 1943. Intelligence analysts spread reconnaissance photos across the briefing table. Schweinfurt's ball bearing plants, Regensburg's Messerschmitt factories, strategic targets 500 miles deep into Germany. The bomber crews called it the Death Run. Without fighter escort beyond the German border, B-17s died in formations. 60 bombers lost in a single mission, 600 aircrew. The mathematics were unsustainable. At this rate, 8th Air Force would cease to exist by spring 1944. The P-47 changed the calculation, slowly at first, then decisively. March 1943, combat radius 175 miles with internal fuel, barely to the French coast. July 1943, 230 miles with one 200-gallon belly tank. October 1943, 340 miles with two 150-gallon wing tanks plus belly tank. Each increment pushed the safe zone deeper into Germany. Luftwaffe fighter bases that once operated with impunity suddenly faced American fighters. The strategic impact cascaded rapidly. German fighter production increased from 1,000 aircraft monthly to 2,500 by late 1943, but pilot quality collapsed. Training time dropped from 240 hours to 160, then to 110. Experienced aces rotated to the Eastern Front. Replacement pilots lasted an average of 7 missions. Meanwhile, American escort tactics evolved ruthlessly. Colonel Hubert Zemke's 56th Fighter Group, Zemke's Wolfpack, developed the systematic high-altitude sweep, position at 32,000 feet, wait for bomber formations. When Luftwaffe fighters climb to intercept, dive on them with energy advantage, kill, climb back up using the turbo supercharger's power. The Germans tried climbing above the escorts. They couldn't. Above 30,000 feet, the Bf-109's rate of climb degraded to 500 feet per minute. The FW-190 was worse. P-47s could maintain 1,000 feet per minute past 35,000 feet. Luftwaffe doctrine changed out of desperation. Attack only when Americans are low, avoid combat above 25,000 feet, conserve altitude advantage. But bomber escorts began at altitude. The turbo supercharger had shifted the strategic balance. Now, it would decide individual lives in seconds.
June 26, 1943. 31,000 feet over France. Robert Johnson flew tail-end Charlie in the 61st Squadron's formation. Worst position. Everyone knew it. The formation staggered across the sky, 48 P-47s escorting B-17s home from Villacoublay. Behind them, 16 Focke-Wulf 190s of Jagdgeschwader 26 climbed undetected through broken clouds. The radio crackled. Explosion. Johnson's cockpit erupted. Glass shrapnel, blood spray across instruments. The FW-190 had fired from dead astern, point-blank range. 21 20mm cannon shells walked up the fuselage in 2 seconds. Hydraulic fluid, red, viscous, sprayed across the windscreen. The oil pressure gauge spun to 0, coolant temperature redlined. The control stick went mushy, rudder pedals dead. He couldn't see through the blood and hydraulic mist. The P-47 snap-rolled left, nose dropping into a spin, altimeter unwinding, 28,000, 25,000, 22,000 feet. Johnson's hands found the canopy release, pulled, jammed. Boots on the panel, full strength against the frame. It moved 3 inches, enough to get his head and shoulders through. The parachute harness caught on torn metal. I'm not going without it. He pulled back inside, fought the controls. The horizon appeared through gaps in the sprayed fluid, inverted, sideways, rolling. The turbo supercharger still screamed behind him, engines still running despite catastrophic damage. Below 15,000 feet now. He got the nose up, slight response in the elevators. The spin stopped, a shuddering, barely controlled glide. The FW-190 appeared alongside. The German pilot's face visible through the canopy, looking at the shattered Thunderbolt, shaking his head. He pulled behind Johnson, fired again. Tracers walked across the wings, holes punched through aluminum skin. The P-47 shuddered but held together. The German pulled alongside again, examined the wreckage stuff flying, rocked his wings, turned for home. Johnson pointed the battered Thunderbolt toward England, 20 miles to the coast. The turbo supercharger kept spinning.
The turbo supercharger's mechanical elegance solved a problem that had killed dozens of engine programs, maintaining power in thin air without parasitic losses. The physics. At sea level, atmospheric pressure provides 14.7 psi. Each cubic foot contains sufficient oxygen molecules for complete combustion. At 30,000 feet, pressure drops to 4.4 psi, less than 1/3. Naturally aspirated engines lose approximately 70% of sea level power. The General Electric C-23 turbo supercharger recovered that power through exhaust energy harvesting. 18 cylinders of the Pratt & Whitney R2800 expelled exhaust gases at temperatures exceeding 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. These gases routed through stainless steel pipes running 19 feet from the engine to a turbine bucket wheel in the fuselage belly. The turbine, essentially a precisely balanced windmill, spun at 21,300 RPM at full power. This rotational energy drove a centrifugal compressor on the same shaft. The compressor drew outside air through a large belly scoop, accelerated it outward via centrifugal force, and expelled it at elevated pressure, up to 60 inches of mercury, approximately 30 psi of boost. Problem: compressing air generates heat. Hot air is less dense than cool air, defeating the purpose. Solution: intercoolers.
Compressed air traveled through heat exchangers cooled by ram air before entering the engine's mechanical supercharger, a second-stage compression system. This dropped intake temperatures by 200–300 degrees Fahrenheit. The mechanical supercharger provided additional compression, then fed the carburetor. Final mixture entered cylinders at near sea level density, even at 40,000 feet. Control system. A regulator sensed manifold pressure and adjusted wastegates, bypass valves that dumped excess exhaust overboard. This prevented overboost and detonation. The complete system weighed 977 pounds and required 43 feet of ducting, but it delivered 2,000 horsepower at 27,000 feet, altitudes where BF-109s produced 1,100 horsepower and FW-190s managed barely 900. That 1,000 horsepower advantage at altitude wasn't theoretical. It was the difference between hunter and prey.
The fear wasn't the Luftwaffe. It was the altitude itself. Lieutenant James Goodson described the psychological toll. 5 miles above Earth, looking down at France through frozen perspex, your oxygen mask freezing to your face. Alone in a metal coffin at 400 below zero. The bombers are black dots below. You scan for fighters until your eyes burn, then you scan more. The turbo supercharger demanded constant vigilance. Pilots monitored boost pressure, RPM, exhaust temperature, intercooler efficiency, wastegate position. One mistake, overboosting during combat maneuvering, could detonate the engine. The cold was existential. At 35,000 feet, outside air temperature dropped to -60 Fahrenheit. Hydraulic fluid thickened, gun oil congealed. Pilots' fingers went numb inside electric gloves that rarely worked properly. Frostbite on operational missions, common. Hypoxia from failed oxygen systems, fatal. The psychological cost compounded over missions. Bomber crews faced flak, random, impersonal death from below. Fighter pilots faced individual combat, personal. A German pilot's face visible through canopy glass at 200 yards, his tracers walking toward your cockpit. Robert Johnson's post-combat assessment, June 26, 1943. I pictured my family receiving the telegram, missing in action, probably dead. I couldn't do that to them. I couldn't go down. That will to survive, powered by a turbo supercharger that refused to quit despite catastrophic damage, brought him across the channel. German accounts reveal mirror image terror. Luftwaffe pilot Heinz Noke, diary entry, October 1943. The Americans climb where we cannot follow. They dive on us with tremendous speed. We cannot escape. Our altitude advantage, our traditional defense, is gone. The turbo supercharger didn't just provide mechanical advantage. It reversed the psychological dynamic. German pilots, accustomed to choosing when and where to fight, now faced opponents who dictate engagement terms. Height equals might, fighter doctrine taught. The Americans owned the height. The psychological impact was crushing.
Rechlin Test Center, Germany. July 1943. Luftwaffe engineers surrounded the captured P-47D, serial number 428681. Shot down near Paris, force landed intact. Second Lieutenant William Roach, now prisoner at Stalag Luft 1. Test pilot Hans Werner Lersch conducted the evaluation. His report, classified Geheim, documented grudging respect. The cockpit is remarkably spacious compared to the BF-109. The sliding canopy opens easily at low speeds. The pilot can sit comfortably for hours, significant for long-range escort work. He flew the Thunderbolt to 30,000 feet. Above 25,000 feet, performance becomes outstanding. Rate of roll at high speed exceeds our aircraft. The weight advantage in dives is extraordinary. We measured indicated airspeeds approaching 700 kilometers per hour without structural failure. The turbo supercharger fascinated and frustrated German engineers. They understood the concept. Focke-Wulf had experimented with exhaust-driven turbochargers on FW-190 variants. Every test ended in mechanical failure. The turbines couldn't withstand sustained high-temperature operation, bearing seizures, blade failures, catastrophic engine fires. American metallurgy, specifically General Electric's high-temperature alloys, proved superior. German countermeasures evolved through necessity rather than technology. Tactical Directive, October 1943, engage American escorts only below 20,000 feet. If combat altitude exceeds 25,000 feet, disengage immediately and dive away. This created tactical paradox. Bomber formations flew at 25,000, 28,000 feet. To attack them, German fighters had to climb, but climbing exposed them to P-47s waiting above at 32,000 feet. Some Luftwaffe units tried radical solutions. BF-109K variants with methanol water injection boosted emergency power temporarily, but the system couldn't run continuously, 10 minutes maximum before engine damage. Others attempted climbing ambushes, positioning above predicted bomber routes at 38,000 feet before P-47s arrived.
This rarely worked. P-47s could reach 42,000 feet if needed. By late 1943, Luftwaffe training manuals included specific P-47 avoidance procedures, the ultimate countermeasure: avoid fighting them at all. The turbo supercharger's advantage proved insurmountable. German engineering couldn't match it, tactics couldn't nullify it. The Americans hunted at altitudes where others suffocated.
May 8, 1944. Major Robert Johnson climbed into his P-47D for the 91st and final time. 27 confirmed kills. First American ace to surpass Eddie Rickenbacker's World War I record of 26. He'd survived engine failures, flak damage, mid-air collisions, and that impossible mission on June 26, 1943, when 21 cannon shells should have killed him. The turbo supercharger brought him home every time. The strategic verdict was mathematical. Between April 1943 and VE Day, P-47s flew 546,000 combat sorties. They claimed 3,752 air-to-air kills against 3,499 losses, roughly equal exchange ratio. But the altitude advantage forced Luftwaffe fighters low, where they couldn't effectively intercept bombers. The bomber losses dropped from 9.2% per mission in August 1943 to 2.1% by March 1944. That difference, 7.1% per mission across 18,000 bomber sorties, represented approximately 31,000 aircrew lives saved. The turbo supercharger's legacy extended beyond World War II. General Electric's high-altitude expertise directly enabled the B-29 Superfortress's pressurized long-range missions. Post-war jet engine development built on turbo supercharger metallurgy and thermal management. The P-47 itself remained in frontline service until 1955 in some air forces. Total production, 15,686 aircraft, more than any other American fighter. But the deeper legacy was conceptual. The turbo supercharger proved that waste energy, exhaust heat previously dumped overboard, could be harvested for strategic advantage. Modern turbochargers in everything from Formula One engines to diesel trucks trace lineage to Sanford Moss's team at General Electric and Alexander Kartvel's willingness to design an entire aircraft around the technology. Robert Johnson died December 27, 1998, at age 78. He never forgot the sound of that turbine spinning at 21,300 RPM behind his seat, keeping him alive when nothing else could. The Germans never built a comparable system. The Americans owned the high ground for 3 years. That was enough. Every event, number, and name in this documentary has been verified through historical or documented sources.
The gunner's hands are shaking. Not from fear, from the recoil. Another 4-round clip slams into the Bofors 40mm mount. The barrel glows orange in the Pacific twilight. Tracer rounds arc skyward, red ribbons trying to catch a diving Zero fighter whose pilot has no intention of pulling up. 40 yards to starboard, a gunner screams into his sound-powered phone. "He's through! He's—" The Kamikaze hits USS Bunkersill's flight deck at 495 miles per hour. 200 pounds of high explosive, 1,000 gallons of aviation fuel. The fireball erupts 3 decks deep. 389 men die in 11 minutes. But here's what the Japanese pilot never saw. 300 yards behind Bunker Hill, another carrier's guns are already tracking his wingman. The Mark 37 Director's radar has locked on. 5-inch shells, each one carrying a miniature radio transmitter, are climbing to meet him at 2,600 feet per second. The pilot banks, adjusts, dies. The VT fuse detonates 40 feet from his cockpit. The shrapnel cloud is invisible, lethal. The Zero disintegrates into a spray of aluminum and flame that hits the ocean like hail. The second kamikaze never gets close. This is May 11, 1945, Okinawa. The bloodiest naval campaign in American history is entering its 6th week. Over the next 72 hours, the U.S. Navy will face 1,900 suicide aircraft. Pilots with one-way fuel tanks and photographs of the Emperor tucked into their flight suits. Young men trained to die. But they're flying into something the Japanese High Command doesn't fully understand yet. Not just guns, not just ships. A system. 3 technologies, VT proximity fuses, Bofors 40mm cannons, and fire control radar, have fused into something unprecedented. A defensive sphere so dense, so precise, that attacking it is mathematical suicide. Stay with this story, because what happens next will reshape naval warfare forever.
Rewind 18 months. October 25, 1944, the Battle of Leyte Gulf. Admiral Takejiro Onishi is standing in a sweltering operations room on Mabalacat Airfield in the Philippines, watching his Air Force evaporate. In the past 72 hours, conventional attacks have cost him 63 aircraft. They've damaged 4 American ships. The math is catastrophic. Then Lieutenant Yukio Seki volunteers for something different. Not an attack, a sacrifice. 1 plane, 1 ship, no return flight. Onishi doesn't hesitate. Within hours, 5 Mitsubishi A6M0s are airborne, each loaded with 500-pound bombs, each pilot wearing a white headband embroidered with the rising sun. At 10:53 a.m., Seki's Zero punches through the combat air patrol surrounding the escort carrier USS St. Lo. The impact detonates the ship's torpedo magazine. St. Lo sinks in 30 minutes, the first major American warship destroyed by a kamikaze. The tactic works. And that's the problem. Because by January 1945, U.S. Navy intelligence estimates the Japanese have reserved 10,000 aircraft for special attack operations. The pilots are undertrained, many have fewer than 100 flight hours, but they don't need dogfighting skills, they need to reach the target and die. At Iwo Jima in February, 50 kamikazes sink the escort carrier Bismarck C and cripple the fleet carrier Saratoga. The casualty rates are staggering, 389 dead on Bunker Hill, 346 on Franklin. The Navy's dead are exceeding the wounded, a reversal of every previous Pacific engagement. The strategic nightmare is simple. If this continues through the planned invasion of Japan, the losses will be unsustainable. Enter 3 separate innovations, developed in isolation, now converging at exactly the right moment. A radio fuse invented in a Baltimore laboratory, a Swedish cannon manufactured in 110 American factories, and a fire control system that turns ships into networked fortresses. The Japanese are about to fly into a revolution they can't see.
Baltimore, Maryland, winter 1940. Dr. Merle Tuve is staring at a problem the size of a .50 caliber shell. The U.S. Navy wants a proximity fuse, a device that detonates near an aircraft instead of requiring a direct hit. Simple in theory, impossible in practice. The fuse must contain a miniature radio transmitter, receiver, amplifier, battery, and detonator. All of it must survive the 20,000 G shock of being fired from a 5-inch gun, and it must cost less than $50 to manufacture. Tube's team at Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory starts with vacuum tubes, glass tubes, in a projectile experiencing forces that would crush a cinder block. They fail. Repeatedly. Then someone suggests, make the tubes smaller. Reinforce the filaments. Pot the entire assembly in wax. By March 1941, they have a working prototype the size of a light bulb. It sends out a radio signal. When the reflection frequency shifts, indicating a closing target, a capacitor discharges. The detonator fires. The shell becomes its own radar. 1,000 miles west, Chrysler Corporation's factory floor is being retooled, not for cars, for Bofors 40mm cannons. The Swedish design arrived in America as a single prototype in 1940, smuggled via Finland to avoid German interception. The problem, Swedish manufacturing diagrams specify hand-fitting and custom assembly, completely unsuitable for mass production. American engineers gut the design, standardize tolerances, redesign the automatic loader. By January 1942, the first twin mount rolls off the assembly line. 4 months later, the first quadruple mount, 4 barrels synchronized to fire 640 rounds per minute. September 1842, Crosley Corporation delivers the first batch of VT fuses to the Navy. Each one costs $18. Each one contains technology that will remain classified until 1945. The components are ready. Now they need a battlefield. January 5, 1943, Guadalcanal. Lieutenant Red Cochran commands the aft 5-inch battery on USS Helena. The light cruiser is returning from a raid when radar picks up Japanese dive bombers closing at 14,000 feet. Cochran's gun crew loads 3 shells fitted with the new VT fuses, top secret, never combat tested, shipped to the Pacific with strict orders, do not allow them to fall into enemy hands. The first salvo fires. The second salvo fires. The HE-D3A Val dive bomber explodes 1,200 yards away. No direct hit. The shell detonated 40 feet from the aircraft's wing, and the shrapnel cloud shredded control surfaces, fuel lines, pilot. Cochran stares. His spotter stares. The bridge radios down. What the hell did you just fire? Nobody knows yet, but the gun crew telegraphs the shell's serial number back to Chrysler Corporation.
Within 24 hours, factory workers are celebrating. They've just invented aerial death at a distance. The old math, 1,000 rounds of timed fuse ammunition per aircraft kill. The new math, 250 rounds. 4-to-1 advantage. But there's a catch. The VT fuse's electronics won't fit inside anything smaller than a 76mm shell. That means only the big guns, the 5-inch batteries, can use them. The Bofors 40mm cannons, which will become the Navy's primary close-in defense, are stuck with impact fuses. They need a direct hit. At the Battle of Midway in June 1942, Bofors guns saw their first major action. One destroyer reported shooting down 32 Japanese aircraft in 30 minutes, so new the guns hadn't been test-fired before combat. The gunners learned fast. Lead the target. Aim where it's going. Watch the tracers. Adjust. Pray you hit before the pilot decides not to pull up.
By mid-1944, the technological race enters industrial overdrive. 87 American firms across 110 factories are manufacturing VT fuses. Production climbs to 40,000 units per month. The Navy is installing them on every ship with 5-inch guns, destroyers, cruisers, battleships, carriers. Intelligence officers report the Japanese have captured unexploded VT shells from Guadalcanal. They've tried to reverse engineer them. They fail. The miniaturization is too advanced. Meanwhile, Bofors production explodes. The Navy builds 2,300 quad mounts, 10,000 twin mounts, 10,000 single mounts. Cost drops from $86,000 per quad mount to $67,250 as assembly lines optimize. Every major warship gets retrofitted. The Essex-class carriers carry 10 to 18 quad mounts each. USS Saratoga mounts 23 quads and 2 twins, 96 barrels total. Then comes the third piece, fire control radar. The Mark 37 gun fire control system, paired with Mark 12 and Mark 22 radars, transforms 5-inch batteries into precision instruments. Range accuracy within 50 yards at 20,000 yards. The system calculates target speed, altitude, direction, and sets the VT fuse timing automatically. A Mark 37 director can slay multiple gun mounts to a single target track. But the real revolution happens below decks. Combat Information Centers, CICs, emerge as the nervous system of the fleet. Dark rooms filled with radar screens, plotting tables, radio circuits. Trained operators track every aircraft within 100 miles. Fighter directors vector F-6F Hellcats to intercept incoming lades before they reach the ships. Gunnery liaison officers feed target data to every gun mount simultaneously. At the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, this system achieves near perfection. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, 300 Japanese aircraft destroyed. American fighters intercept most. The ones that penetrate the cap fly into radar-directed VT-fused shells. 3 Japanese pilots reach their targets. 300 don't.
April 6, 1945. Radar Picket Station 1, northwest of Okinawa. The destroyer's CIC is a cave of dim red light and static-filled radio chatter. The radar operator watches his scope. Green phosphorescent blips multiply at the edge of the display, 80 miles out, closing at 180 knots. Raid inbound, multiple contacts. I count 40 plus. The evaluator keys the radio. All stations, this is Delegate. Raid Alpha, bearing 350, Angels 12, launch cap. Topside, the Bofors crews are already at their stations. 7 men per mount. Gun captain, pointer, trainer, 4 loaders with clips. The ammunition passers form a human chain from the magazine, passing 4-round clips hand to hand. The first kamikaze breaks through the fighter screen at 10,000 feet. A Mitsubishi Zero, fuel tanks full, 500-pound bomb slung beneath the fuselage. The pilot pushes into a 45-degree dive. Range, 8,000 yards. The Mark 37 director locks. The 5-inch mount swings smoothly to bearing. Computer below decks calculates intercept. Fuse settings transmit automatically. Fire. The shell climbs. The VT fuse's transmitter is broadcasting now, a pulse every microsecond, searching for the reflection frequency that means target close enough. At 4,200 feet, the capacitor discharges. The detonation creates a shrapnel cloud 30 feet across. The Zero's wing separates. The aircraft tumbles, corkscrewing into the sea 2,000 yards short. But there are 39 more. Range, 4,000 yards. The Bofors mounts open fire, a sound like a massive zipper being ripped apart. Tracer rounds create overlapping fans of red light. The gunner watches through his sight. Target center, lead 2 degrees, squeeze. A kamikaze disintegrates at 1,500 yards. Another at 800.
a third at too close. The pilot's face is visible through the canopy when his Zero hits the destroyer's forward stack.
The physics of survival comes down to milliseconds and mathematics. The VT fuse operates on Doppler shift principles. The miniature transmitter, a vacuum tube smaller than your thumb, broadcasts at 180 to 200 megahertz. When the radio wave reflects off a closing aircraft, the return frequency increases. The circuit is calibrated to fire when the frequency differential indicates range, 20 to 60 feet. Detonation creates a fragmentation pattern optimized for aircraft destruction. A 5-inch VT shell contains 1.1 pounds of explosive D. The casing shatters into approximately 1,000 high-velocity fragments. Effective lethal radius, 60 feet against aircraft. But the system has vulnerabilities. Failure rate, 30%. Some sources cite 50% under combat conditions. The vacuum tubes are fragile. Moisture infiltration causes shorts. Heavy rain can trigger premature detonation. The Navy accepts this because even with failures, VT fuses outperform time fuses by 4 to 1. The Bofors presents different engineering, kinetic energy, and rate of fire. Muzzle velocity, 2,890 feet per second. Each 40mm projectile weighs 1.985 pounds, nearly 2 pounds of hardened steel traveling faster than most rifle bullets. On impact, kinetic energy alone can shear through aircraft aluminum. The high explosive projectiles contain 60 grams of explosive D with an impact fuse. Practical rate of fire, 120 rounds per minute per barrel in sustained combat. The theoretical maximum, 160 RPM, requires perfect crew coordination. Each 4-round clip must be manually inserted. Loaders develop specific techniques. Hold clip at 45 degrees, slam down, don't watch your fingers. The Mark 51 director provides the mathematical bridge. An electromechanical analog computer, gyroscopes, gears, calculates lead angles based on target bearing rate and range rate. The director can slay 4 quad mounts simultaneously, 16 barrels tracking a single target, creating an inescapable cone of fire. Together, these systems establish overlapping defensive zones. Long-range, VT fuses kill at 8,000 yards. Medium-range, conventional 5-inch shells, 2,000 to 8,000 yards. Close-range, Bofors, inside 4,000 yards. The gaps are measured in seconds.
The human cost isn't measured in statistics alone. Ensign David Wilcuts, stationed in the CIC of USS Laffey during the Okinawan campaign, later wrote, "We tracked them for 30 minutes before they arrived, watching the blips crawl across the scope, knowing each one was a man who'd eaten breakfast that morning, who'd written final letters, who tied his headband and climbed into a cockpit he'd never climb out of." Laffey survived 6 kamikaze hits and 4 bomb strikes in 80 minutes. 29 crew members died, 72 wounded. The Bofors gunners developed a specific kind of exhaustion, arms cramping from holding sight picture, ears ringing despite cotton wadding. Some crews fired continuously for an hour, 7,200 rounds from a single quad mount. Loaders' hands bled from clip edges, spent brass accumulated ankle deep. One gunner's mate recalled, "You stop thinking about them as people. They're just targets. You see the face through the canopy at 500 yards and your brain doesn't register it. Just lead 2 degrees, fire, next target." Combat Information Center crews faced different trauma, watching radar blips disappear, each one a fighter pilot, friendly or enemy, each one someone's son. The CIC operators became numb to it. 30 blips gone meant 30 kills, friendly and enemy combined, and there wasn't time to process which was which. But the kamikazes experienced something worse, certainty. Pilot Isao Matsuo wrote the night before his final mission, "Dear parents, please congratulate me. I have been given a splendid opportunity to die. This is my last day." He was 19. His Zero was destroyed by a VT shell at 6,000 feet. The proximity fuse detonated 42 feet from his cockpit. Death was instantaneous, faster than human nervous system reaction time. Some historians argue this was mercy. Most don't.
The Japanese adapted, desperately. Intelligence reports from late 1944 show Imperial Navy engineers testing captured VT shells. They successfully extracted intact fuses from duds recovered at Guadalcanal. Reverse engineering teams at Kure Naval Arsenal photographed every component. They understood the principle, radio proximity detection. They couldn't replicate it. American miniaturization techniques were 5 years ahead. The vacuum tubes alone required manufacturing precision Japan's war-damaged industrial base couldn't match. So they changed tactics. Low-altitude approaches. VT fuses performed poorly below 500 feet. Ground clutter confused the return signal, causing premature detonation over water.
Kamikaze pilots began their dives at 1,000 feet instead of 10,000. This compressed the defensive window, but increased vulnerability to Bofors fire. Twilight attacks. Radar operators struggled to distinguish aircraft from sea return at low sun angles. Some kamikaze groups timed strikes for 30 minutes before sunset, when visual acquisition was difficult and radar performance degraded. Coordinated swarms. If 20 aircraft attacked simultaneously from different vectors, the Mark 37 directors could only track a fraction. The rest would penetrate. At Okinawa's Kikusui No. 1 on April 6, 350 kamikazes attacked over 5 hours. 22 penetrated the defenses. 6 ships sank, 18 damaged, 350 American sailors died. The mathematics were brutal but clear. Even with advanced defenses, saturation attacks worked. The Navy responded with layered CAP, combat air patrol stationed at 50, 75, and 100 miles. Radar picket destroyers at 16 stations surrounding Okinawa, each with fighter director teams. And production acceleration. By May 1945, VT fuse manufacturing reached 50,000 units monthly. Still, the casualty rate climbed. From October 1944 through August 1945, kamikazes achieved a 14% hit rate, low by conventional standards. Devastating when the attackers numbered in thousands, and willing to die.
The final equation was never completed. Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan, would have required the U.S. Navy to station carriers and support ships within kamikaze range for months. Intelligence estimated the Japanese had reserved 10,000 aircraft for homeland defense. Even with VT fuses, Bofors guns, and radar, the projected losses were catastrophic, potentially 400 to 800 ships damaged or sunk. The atomic bombs rendered the question moot. But the technologies survived. They evolved. The VT fuse became the foundation for modern proximity-detonated missiles. The concept, a projectile that senses its own proximity to target, now appears in everything from anti-aircraft missiles to artillery shells. The miniaturization breakthroughs pioneered at Johns Hopkins enabled the transistor revolution of the 1950s. The Bofors 40mm served through Korea, Vietnam, and into the 1990s. Some navies still deploy variants today. The Swedish design from 1929, mass-produced in American factories during a desperate war, proved so effective it became universal. The Radar and Combat Information Center concept transformed naval warfare permanently. Modern Aegis combat systems trace their lineage directly to the darkened rooms where CIC operators tracked blips on phosphorescent screens. The idea, centralized information processing feeding decentralized weapon systems, defines 21st century network-centric warfare. The human cost remains staggering. At Okinawa alone, 4,907 U.S. Navy personnel killed, primarily by kamikazes. Nearly 3,000 Japanese pilots died in suicide attacks across the entire campaign. Young men, undertrained, sent on one-way missions against a technological wall they couldn't breach. The wall held, barely. Not through single innovation, but through convergence. Swedish engineering, American industry, radar science, and the sailors who stood in open gun mounts watching aircraft dive toward them at 400 miles per hour. They called it the Wall of Steel. History calls it the moment naval defense became a science. Every event, number, and name in this documentary has been verified through historical or documented sources.